On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Harrison Tang. He is the CEO and co-founder at Spokeo. We're going to be talking about Gen AI in relation to data creation and entity resolution. Harrison's going to dive in, talk to us about what that means, how that really impacts Gen AI and the solutions you can build on it. I think it's going to be a very fascinating conversation. Harrison, thanks for joining the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Amir, for inviting us.
Absolutely. All right. So before we start, please, if you could tell everyone what Spokeo does as a company.
Yeah, so Spokeo is a leading people search engine and identity platform that organizes about 19 billion records. And we actually link them into, resolve them into about 600 million entities to help about 15 million users a month to search, connect, and know who they're dealing with.
Well, I mean, you certainly deal with a lot of data. So I am sure this is problems that you have either seen, are solving, or have thought about. So,
the truth is the problem of who we are, the problem of identity, the problem of person entity is a problem that has existed since the beginning of human race, right? So, I mean, quoting Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that's the question, right? So the question of being who the person is an age-old problem. And it's one of the six W's. Who is one of the six W's, six most important questions in English language or any language in the world. So very, very excited to solve this very, very hard problem because it actually does matter, especially when the idea of digital world, or some people might call it metaverse, emerges. The who we are in this digital world becomes even more important.
absolutely. All right. Just to set a baseline, I'm sure a lot of the listeners have heard the term entity resolution. I'm sure they're familiar with it. But just to make sure, can we just start off at the top and can you define what that is, especially in the context of what you guys do?
Yes. So entity resolution is essentially the process of finding, comparing, and matching records, different records that belong to the same person entity together. So I think that's the definition, but if you dig into it, it's actually quite hard. First of all, you have to define what is being, what is existence. Being in the physical world is quite obvious. You can kind of see it, you can feel it. The being, the existence in the digital world is actually an artificial construct. So one of the artifacts of existence is actually whether this thing is unique and identifiable. So the artifact will be identifiers. So essentially what entity resolution do is the creation of an identifier and the correct assignment of that unique identifier to different records, essentially creating what's called a graph, and a graph of records belonging to the same person entity so that you can actually link, merge, and then create a digital identity out of it.
When you're looking at that problem, just from the outside looking in, I'd imagine one of the most challenging pieces is to validate each piece of information that's built to create that single entity that's resolved.
Yes. Actually, there's multiple different hard problems. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
So one of the hardest problems is distributed computing. So Spokeo organized about 19 billion records. So comparing two records together, that sounds pretty simple. But if you compare 19 billion records, do a pairwise comparison, then you need to do 19 billion to the power of 2. That's 19 times 19, and then the 18 zeros behind it, right? So obviously, that's going to be quite impossible or take forever to calculate and do those kind of pairwise comparisons. So you have to do what's called blocking. Essentially, it's a distributed computing concept, so that you can do it. You can do it a lot faster in a parallel fashion. So that's one problem. And another problem is kind of what you mentioned, is that when you actually link all these together, and let's say this merge entity has like 10 phone numbers, which one is the correct one? So you kind of have to determine use what we call the criteria of truth, which is actually inspired by some in the philosophy discipline, actually. And there are several criteria, like, for example, consensus, majority rule. That's kind of like the truth in blockchain and distributed ledgers. There's consistency, coherence, correspondence, and so on, so on, so on. I can dig into it further, but that's another tough challenge. Is like, how do you know what is true and what is not?
I definitely we like to maybe dig into that, and I guess before you do, I guess the volume of data, it's not, a mountain full is not even the right term. When you're looking at the volume of data to this point and the volume of data that's being created, you mentioned obviously, distributed computing is core to all this. As the volume of data is increasing, as Gen AI is helping everyone produce data at a faster rate, what are some of the obstacles that you're going to foresee to be able to still maintain the level of entity resolution that you guys have currently?
You know, as the volume of data increases, and obviously that adds more burden to ingestion of data and processing of data. So in the data world, there's a saying called garbage in, garbage out. And the core theme of that statement is that the beginning is the most important. So you have to do the quality check right at the very start. You have to identify whether this data is garbage or if it's actually good and trusted. And you let the trusted ones in. Because if you actually take in everything altogether, then the problem becomes very, very tough. So it's actually the opposite of the Web2 mantra of growth hacking. So the growth hacking, they care about the output, right? They care about the what, not the how. But the data culture is actually the opposite. You have to focus on the quality checks from the very, very get-go. So then you don't have bad data quality that propagates through your pipeline.
The criteria for truth you mentioned, obviously, there's a couple of dimensions in there. When you're looking at the 4 or 5 dimensions, how do those get weighted? Do they get weighted equally, or does one get preferential treatment, or how do these different dimensions work together?
So they actually do get weighted differently, and that's the authority criteria. So I'll get into what are the main criteria. So the first criteria is consensus. I'll use an example of blockchains and distributed ledgers. In blockchains, what is true is basically majority of nodes says true, then it becomes true. Okay, but if you only uses that, then then the world will always be flat, right? Because at some point in human history, we all believe that the Earth is flat. So if consensus is true, then the world will never be round actually. So consensus is not enough. Oh, another example of consensus is our legal system, right? So whether it's the Supreme Court and things like that, it's a majority rule or 80%, those kind of majority rule. If they say, hey, it's true, then it becomes true. So that criteria cannot go by itself. So you add another criteria, which is authority, right? So for example, birthdays. In the data world, the most authoritative source for birthdays will be driver licenses issued by DMVs. Okay. And I can get into why that's the case. But for the death information, for example, it comes from the Social Security Administration. And, so different issuers, different data points have different authoritative issuers. So the more authoritative ones, you add more weight, right? Whereas a claim issued by Harrison Tang, that probably doesn't weigh as much as one of those government entities. So that's called authority criteria. And there is consistency. Like for example, you have a lot of sources that says the same thing, right? Are they consistent? Then that's probably more trusted. If there's a lot of inconsistencies, then the data points becomes less trusted, right? And then there is coherence, which actually can be manifested in what's called anomaly detection. So, for example, a person is likely not going to be 100 years old, right? So when you see an age that's over 100 years old, and by the way, it does happen, then you start questioning what's the trustworthiness of the record and the source, right? And then there's correspondence. Is how does this credential And by the way, credentials is defined as claims or data attributes about someone made by someone else. So how does this particular credential aligns with the physical reality? So how does that correspond to the physical reality? And there's technology such as authentications and so on that actually does that. So there's multiple criteria, and the key thing is there's no one rule that rules them all. You have to look at all of them.
I guess as you're kind of going through the criteria and the scale of matching, when we're talking about AI and finding those tasks that are repeatable, that are able to be automated to a certain degree, is this process of entity resolution something that the AI can excel at?
So first of all, there's multiple kinds of AI, and so there's the boosting decision trees and so on that has been around for a long time. I think what got most attention in the past a year and 2 years is what's called large language models, right? So it's a natural language processing data model in the NLP kind of discipline. It's a type of generated AI. So it's what's called a decoder architecture. So basically it takes the embeddings. I'm getting a little bit technical here, but essentially it takes embeddings and actually decodes it to the language space. So that's hence the word generative, because it generates content. So generative AI is actually quite good at generating content. So a great example will be what's called mock data generation. So at Spokeo, we care a lot about security. So a lot of very sensitive data, like people don't have access to it. It's all encrypted. So if you don't have the proper private keys, you cannot access to that, right? So the developers don't have access to real data information. So how can you actually develop and build data pipelines if you don't have real data? Then you need to use what's called a mock, or basically fake generate data. So Gen AI, large language models, is actually quite good at it. But in regards to knowing what is true and what is not, that's not what generative AI is good for. It can do things like, is this name a male or female? It can actually do those things quite well. So if you're using it to do common sense check, like data QA, I think it has a lot of promises. But in regards to actually discerning truth from fake information, it's not, it's not their, it's not their strength. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that's that's maybe the interesting thing is that you guys are going through this process of entity resolution. There are criteria of truth. As I was listening to the criteria, it sounds as though that's how humans, if we go through a simple process of trying to figure out what I want to eat for a restaurant, we go to maybe a Yelp or Google. We start trying to validate whose authority criteria exist. Do I really like what this person's saying? What's the history? It depends how in depth you want to go, of course, to really see whether or not, and that's simple. And that's one or two data points. And as you're scaling this out, over these several billions and billions of records, I guess that scale. I mean, yes, there are different types of AI, and whether an AI could actually determine authority criteria based on those weights and those various criteria of truth. I guess that's interesting. Far away, it seems. Do you foresee a day as if you're going to put your pontificating hat on and look into your crystal ball? I mean, is that something? If we get to that point, will he have passed a lot of this narrow AI? I mean, is that really the kind of the threshold we need to get to, or is AI? This is just something that AI is going to take a while to get to.
Some people really believe in AGI and how AGI will go and replace the human race.
Yeah,
I'm not one of those people.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I believe in humanity. I mean, the truth is that humans is a product of millions of years of evolution, right? So I think and somehow I just don't see how our human intelligence is still based on some signoid and ReLU functions, activation functions. I just kind of don't see that. When I see LLMs, I think one thing that we should all agree on, I think most of us agree on, is an amazing encoder decoder architecture that encodes information right into a latent space and can play it back. I think that's really amazing. And but trying to say that you'll replace all human jobs, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm kind of a skeptic in that philosophy.
Yeah, I like that. I like to joke with people that we're already AGI. I mean, that's if you look at how we evolved and you look at a baby, it's basically what we are, and it's a very interesting process and phenomenon. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, I might not be around. I guess in terms of reality, when you're looking at your opportunity, I guess as you're seeing data scale and data creation grow, there's got to be some opportunities, some challenges in that. Where's the opportunity in that for a company like Spokeo?
In our space, there's roughly 4 big clusters of use cases. So our market is actually quite interesting. It's what's called a long tail marketplace. So there's hundreds of use cases, but we cluster them into 4 types. One is the consumer connectors, which is actually finding contact information to reconnect with others, and business connectors like marketing use cases and so on and so on. And there's a consumer protectors or verifiers. They already know the person, but they just want to get what's called referential information to make sure that they are who they say they are. And there's the business protectors and verifiers like identity verification, financial crime compliance, those kind of use cases. Spokeo a long time ago decided to focus on truth, decided to focus on protector and verification use cases. So that kind of direction actually becomes even more relevant in the age of generative AI, where literally a generation of fake data is 1 or 2 clicks away, right? The technical terminology is zero-shot prompting. Basically, in one prompt, you get the results you want. And you can just try it. You can say, hey, here is a JSON object. These are the schema. Can you fill in the null values for me? And you put the data fields like name, date of birth. You'll just generate something that looks really real. Literally, in one prompt, you get the results back. And that is kind of crazy. And I can foresee that there will be more and more content created by generated AIs, and the problem of knowing what's generated by AI, or what's called provenance, the problem of provenance, the problem of AI detection, the problem of knowing what is truth, what is fake news, will become more and more important. So if we do it right, I think there's a lot of great opportunities for Spokeo ahead.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the first time I saw a deep fake, which is one of those Tom Cruise videos that went viral, and you look at it. I had to look at it several times. I mean, I was potentially thinking it was him, but I was like, this is out of character. And I'm thinking, and I don't know your business, but I'm just thinking, man, like if you're going to try to see a future where these deep fakes are very common, and it's going to be very hard. I think I tried a beta of myself. I sat in front of a camera and it changed me into any celebrity I wanted. I guess if you have these data and the entity resolutions, is potentially the technology going to spread to help us understand when we're seeing something not real? I guess you're kind of alluding to that.
Yeah. So, by the way, just a little tangent. I'm also the co-chair of W3C Credentials Communities Group. So we incubated, identity-related technologies such as verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, and Web3 ID. We recently actually invited the Adobe guys to talk about the content authenticity initiative, and so it's very related to the problem that you're stating. And there's really 4 pillars to solve this problem. the first pillar is provenance. So provenance is basically the 6 W's over time. So who created it, what's being created, why it's created, how it's created, so on, so on, so on. So one of the dimensions will be data lineage, where the data comes from, the origin of data, how it's being transformed, where does it go, the movements, and so on, so on. So that's provenance, lineage. That's one area. And that's where kind of blockchains and those kind of distributed ledger technologies can actually help. And then the second area is detection. So how do you kind of detect whether the data is authentic or not? So in the case of in the image realm, right, they do invisible watermarks, right? So they add watermarks to show that, hey, this data is actually authentic, right? And it's all invisible to human eyes. So that's a detection. So another example of detection will be like payment fraud models. So you're trying to find patterns to detect whether this transaction is fraudulent or not. So that's detection. So provenance, detections, governance. One area of governance is basically, what issuers can be trusted? What authors? Is this a legitimate author? Is it not a legitimate author? Like, what are the rules that actually determines who's more authoritative and who's not? So that's governance. And lastly, education. So you have like these 4 big pillars, and then you have to tackle all of them, and then you can try to understand the authenticity of the content and know what is true and what's not. But apparently, the fact that I have to go into such a details is not a very easy problem to solve.
No, it's not. And obviously, when you can see technology that's being used for good and bad, I think it represents the bigger problem, because now people will believe what they see. It is very hard, I think. It makes everyone has the power to almost, it's been democratized. News has been democratized, and people are able to produce content, and it's hard. It is really hard. I mean, my father-in-law, I love him, and I get constant messages on Instagram from him. At some point, I told my wife I might have to block him, because it's just too much. I don't need to know how his brain works, but that is the world we live in. And I guess final question for you, and you guys are obviously experts in the type of data you're in, and you understand, obviously, I mean, you mentioned your credentials in W3C. As you're kind of looking at maybe the privacy component of data moving forward, as more and more rules and regulations get introduced, how much more complex or complicated does entity resolution get moving forward? Is it something that you have a base and you adjust? Is it introduce some complexities potentially?
So first of all, when we talk about privacy, we need to define what privacy means. So privacy is defined as the control over access to data, right? About oneself or one's group, right? So it's different levels of control. Different people feel differently about privacy, right? And then they also feel differently about different kinds of data privacy. So for example, like I'm okay with people knowing that I have 4 sons, and some people might not feel comfortable sharing that. Now, I'm okay with letting people know I'm 41, but then sharing my social security number publicly is probably not a very smart move. So privacy is context sensitive, and it's actually and it has multiple different contexts, right? What you're sharing, when you're sharing, whom you're sharing, and why you're sharing. So that's privacy, which is different from security, by the way. Security is about the prevention of unauthorized access. So in my opinion, security is a layer on top of privacy, or privacy is a foundation of for security. So privacy actually does make things a little bit more complicated, because privacy, to ensure that the different contexts are being observed and enforced and so on, so on, so on, you need a discipline of what's called identity and access management. And there's multiple ways to do it. The most popular way, in my opinion, is what's called role-based access model. And then you can actually role-based access control. And then you can say, hey, you are a searcher role, you are a verifier role, you are a team manager role, and then what kind of information can you actually access, right? And so it does make it more complicated. But that said, it's a problem that's completely solvable, and Spokeo has been investing quite a bit into that. In regards to your question on entity resolution is a problem of linking, graph traversal, and so on and so on. So the entity resolution actually sits in the Spokeo stack. It actually sits at the bottom. And then you add identity and access management controls on top of those linked data. So entity resolution is actually not affected by identity and access management, those kind of controls, because IAM sits on top of it. Mm-hmm.
I love it when I get to talk to somebody who you could pretty much ask any question and they're going to have an answer. And it's dangerous because I have to be careful not to ask too many left field questions. But I really do appreciate your time. I know you're busy, so I appreciate that. If someone does want to reach out to you to learn more about Spokeo or anything you mentioned on the show, is there a good way that they can connect?
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to check out Spokeo, you can just go to spokeo.com. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm available on all major social media. My handle is Tang Talks, TangTalks.
Awesome. Harrison, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Amir. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, please share this episode with somebody who might be interested in learning about entity resolution. We covered a lot of ground. We learned about the criteria of truth, authority criteria. There's a lot of information in here. Hopefully you will enjoy it. And please share with others that will. Like, subscribe, comment. Please let me know how the podcast is doing for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.